Chapter 7 Dark as Raw Red Night. The following week, on a hot, still Monday morning, Ross rode away from the horse yards. Behind him trotted a herd of loose horses, shepherded by stockmen and their dogs. Some loose horses had pack skirts on their backs. Others ran free, stringing head to tail with each other. The stockmen rode in pairs, talking or calling out to the horses or dogs. Squatted on the wheelbarrow, the boy watched them pass. They look happy, he thought, laughing and talking like that. You can see 'em, they don't worry. There's only them and the sun and the dust. They got all that land to ride on. And he stared beyond Ross to the distance. The plains and scrub glowed brown in the early morning sun. As the dust settled, he fondled Broga. Her head rested over his boot. Rags lay under the barrow. "You know, Brole," the boy told her, "we don't go far. I mean, you and me and Rags, from here to the shed, then on to the stables, then back again to here, with a trip to the kitchen. It ain't far when you see where those fellers go." He pointed after the stockmen, disappearing behind some scrub. Broga pricked her ears to his pointing. She sensed he meant things far away. The boy nodded. "Yeah," he continued, "we don't see much, but it ain't too bad when you reckon. There's worse things about it if you look." He sat up straighter to get a clearer view. Horses and stockmen had disappeared completely. All he could see was drifting dust rising above the scrub clumps. "Bein' lonely," he said, "is one of 'em. I ain't been lonely for a long time, not since Kanga asked me to feed you and to help raise your pups." Sunk hunched again on the barrow. He remembered the pups, the little squirming ones buried near the sandhills. "Yeah," he whispered, as if far, far away. "They were little beauts. I can still feel 'em now, warm in me hands. They would have been big fellers like Rags." At mention of his name, Rags came from under the barrow. For the first time, the boy realized how much the pup had grown. He seemed almost as large as Broga. "Gosh," the boy told him, "you're big all right, and you're gonna grow bigger." Old Kanga wasn't right. The other ones should have lived. They'd been your brothers and sisters. Talking to the dogs, he barely heard a horse jig-jogging by from the stables. He glanced around to see the boss riding Patches and leading Powder. "Having a rest, son?" the boss said with a smile. "That barrow looks comfortable, but mind you don't tip over." And he rode on smiling. His stirrups irons jiggled, glinted in the sunlight. Patches danced in step with Powder. The boy struggled upright, his legs caught on the handles, and the barrow tipped sideways. He had to hop to avoid Rags and Broga. "Yeah," he called, "just sorta settin', watchin' the men ride along the track." The boss chuckled. "I thought it'd tip," he called back. "You'd be safer on a log." Then he added as Patches reared and pranced, "So long, son. We'll be away for a week or so." Sitting balanced on the saddle, he nudged Patches into a fast, rhythmic canter after Ross and his cavalcade. The boy righted the barrow. When he glanced again, Powder and Patches showed white in the distance. "Come on," he told Rags and Broga. "We'll tidy the stables. We're going to miss those two jumpin' jiminies." Hands in pockets, he headed for the stables. A thin, tuneless whistle puckered his lips. The two dogs followed, listening to the sound. Inside the stall, shade gave a temporary coolness. The boy worked slowly, glad he could take his time and not have to dodge Powder and Patches. While he raked, he noticed the wind seemed to be rising. Hot, sudden gusts swirled dust past the doorway, then as suddenly died. After the eddies, the air hung still and heavy, waiting for the next sudden flurry. He could feel the heat growing, gradually hotter. When the stalls were cleaned, he went outside and stared at the sky. Heat hazed it to dull, brassy blue. To the west, beyond the sandhills, stretched a shimmering wall of redness. Its base seemed almost black. "Core," the boy said. "It'll roast you. We'll go on down to the trough and clean it. That'll fill in the hour to dinner." As he trudged bareheaded in the sun glare, Brolga panted at his heels. Rags lolled his head at her flanks. The shade she cast just covered his nose-tip. "Me own shadow," the boy thought, glancing down. "Don't go far. You couldn't cover an egg with it." Sloshing in the trough, the boy felt cooler. He ducked his head and let the water run down inside his shirt. "Lovely," he puffed to Brolga. "Hop in here with Rags. I'll douse the pair of you." Reaching over, he hauled Brolga in by her scruff, then Rags. The two dogs bounced about in the water while he scrubbed behind them with the broom. At the end of an hour, water still flowed out of the open plug-hole. A long stream of water lay soaking into the ground. The trough shone swept clean and shining as the boy splashed up and down. Rags sprawled with Brolga close to the open ball-cock. Water spurted over and under them. "That'll do," the boy said, glancing around. "We've made a fair old puddle. It's a good job Ross ain't here." He tipped them both over the side, then screwed the plug into its hole. Satisfied with the job well done, he stowed the broom. As he leaned on a post to let his trousers drain, the wind gusted stronger. He felt it snatch his shirt, smacking it wetly against his ribs. Across the sandhills, the dark red wall loomed nearer. Tall, spiraling columns of dust whirled above it. It seemed to the boy the whole sky was being smothered. "Phew," he said. "It's blowing out there. All right, and it ain't too far away." "That's a solid wall of dust." Awed by the coming dust storm, he stayed for a while, leaning on the post. Rags and Brolga lay near his feet. When the dinner bell rang, he smoothed his hair before going to the kitchen. Miss Jones stood outside the door, watching the darkness smother. Her large white hands shaded her eyes. "Goodness," she said, "just look at that sky. I hope nothing happens when it reaches here. It would be terrible." She lowered her arms to open the door, then went inside. The boy followed. Miss Jones had lit a lantern, and the light glowed dimly. As he sat down, the boy said, "Yeah, I reckon it would, with Ross and the boss away." "Who is there left behind?" he asked uninterestedly. He saw men about, but seldom bothered to know or speak to them. His interests were with Kanga, Ross, and the stockmen. Miss Jones served his dinner. Just Ted the handyman and some swagman sort of chap. He only started yesterday. She set down the plate before she added, "They're both out fixin' a fence. I gave them sandwiches this morning." Her starched dress, rustled as she went again to the door. The wind blew a violent scurry, and she stood inside, staring out through the gauze. Red powdery dust drifted in through the mesh. She felt it settle on her face and neck. "Ugh," she said, and brushed her cap and apron with the cloth. "I've read about these dust storms, but this is the first one I've experienced." To help keep out the dust, she closed the second or inside door. It made the kitchen so dark she had to light another lantern. Standing close to the boy, she set it on the table. "My goodness," she added, "just look at your shirt. It's soaking wet on the shoulders." The boy pushed away his plate. Sweat began to ooze down his face. He scuffed it on his sleeve. "Yeah," he told her, "I got a bit wet clean in the trough. Now I'm wet with sweat. Core, it's hot with that door shut." He wiped his face again, then stood up. "I'd better get out and see what's doing. The storm's almost here." As he spoke, wind slammed against the kitchen. A scutter of sticks, leaves, and dust grated over the roof. They heard the iron creak, weathering the strain. Worriedly, Miss Jones took the empty plate and placed it in the sink. But you haven't had your pudding, she said. I baked 2 apples, especially. Besides, you can't go out in this. It would knock you off your feet. She listened with the boy to another gust howling over the rooftop. The outside door rattled. Tucking in his shirt, the boy felt undecided. It ain't right, he thought, to leave her, but I'd choke if I stayed much longer. And there's Rags and Brolga outside. He gripped the door handle as he said, I've got to, Miss Jones. There's a few things outside to see to. He turned the handle and leaned to keep on his feet. The wind slapped open the door almost into his face. Dust swirled in past the stove and table. Pulling all he was able, he dragged the door to behind him, shouting, You don't want to worry. Just leave the door shut, and you'll be all right. Outside, he gasped for breath. Wind snatched the air from his mouth. Almost on hands and knees, he crawled around the corner, clear of the house. The full wind force blew him against the hedge. He groped along it to the gate, then clung to the wooden stays for a breather. Over and above the noises about him, he heard the moan of trees somewhere in the dusk murk. That'll be the peppercorns, he thought. Those big old tops must be nearly breaking. When he edged around the gate and out into the open, the howling blast knocked him headlong. Rolling over and over, he clawed for a grip until he smashed against a log. Corey he gasped. I'm on the wood heap. You wouldn't think it'd happen. Waiting for breath, he rubbed his side. The log had a rough, bony knob. As he lay, he thought about Brolga and Rags, wondered how they were faring. Turning over to begin crawling, he felt a warm, wet tongue lick his cheek. Brolga crouched by his head, Rags keened by her side. For a moment the boys saw their dusty, wind-turned coats and keen, questing heads. The sight made him choke. When he could speak he said, You were looking for me, and here was me looking for you. He pulled them close and held them pressed to his chest. Their bodies felt hot inside his wind-blown shirt. It was fluttering from his shoulders. You beauts, he added, you wouldn't lose me, would you? The dogs licked him again before he freed them. Together they crawled toward the feed shed. Once inside, the boy slammed the door. It'll be hot, he told them, but not so hot as the kitchen. The fire there makes it roastin'. Thought of the kitchen made him think of Miss Jones. She'll be frightened, but safe as anything. That house is good, strong timber. You couldn't blow it down. Sprawled back against the wall, he listened to the wind roar. Dust mixed with sand scratched and grated on the roof. Air in the shed swirled hot, with drafts blowing in. It's dark, he thought, dark as raw red night. You can't even see your hands. He held them out and spread his fingers. He could barely see the tips. When he lowered them, Rags nestled underneath. Brolga stretched full length by his side. Toward mid-afternoon, the boy felt the storm worsen. Wind rocked the shed until he thought it would lift. The timber walls creaked, straining on their foundations. It ain't no use, he told the dogs. We just can't sit here. There's Miss Jones with no one to talk to. She'll be scared silly. With the dogs following, he fumbled his way to the door. As he forced up the catch, wind snatched it from his grip. The door hurtled open and swung, slapping on its hinges. Outside, dust boiled in a solid red wall. Phew, the boy gasped. Just look at it, will ya? We'll be lucky if we make it. Brolga whined when he doubled over. Ears flattened by the wind, she whimpered, as if beseeching, but Rags pushed past her. The three crept out into the storm. Halfway to the wood heap, the boy fell flat on his stomach. We'll have a spell, he started to shout, then choked out the words. Wind tore them away from his mouth. After resting a moment, he crawled on again, feeling the path with his hands. Suddenly he ducked. A great sheet of roofing iron, whistling out of the murk, spun over his head. He heard it shear through a bush. Corey thought old Brolga was right. That nearly took me head off. Pressing closer to the ground, he crawled on. The dogs crawled with him. They sensed he was frightened and whined wistfully. Close to the wood heap, he heard the trees again. Their branches threshed and moaned, being torn by the wind. They're still standing, he thought, but they sound kind of sad. They can't hang on forever. To cross the final stretch and reach the hedge, he wriggled on his stomach. He felt the ground scrape his skin. "Hang on," he shouted, though the dogs couldn't hear. Here. Wind snatched the words from his throat. "This bit will be the worst. I got bowled over last time." Blinded by dust, he crawled and groped until he found the gateway. He gasped when he pulled himself through, then helped Rags and Brolga. "Made it," he told them. "Now it ain't too bad. There's the house and hedge for shelter." On hands and knees he crawled around the corner. The double doors tore from his hands as he opened them, but he managed to get inside. Breathless after he closed them, he glanced around for Miss Jones. The two dogs, unsure of the kitchen, crouched at his feet. He remembered the rule of Yambura, no dogs allowed inside the gate. Doubled over to regain his breath, he rubbed their ears. "Phew," he gasped when he could speak. "It's rough out there." Then he added, "I'm sorry about these, but I couldn't leave 'em. You know how it is, Miss Jones." Miss Jones stared. She knew she was smothered with fine red dust. The kitchen was too. But the boy seemed to be all dust from his hair to the dry, cracked boots. His wind-blown shirt hung down outside his trousers. "Well," she managed to say, "well, I never." Unable for a moment to say more, she stood up, still staring at the boy. She reached for another saucer and cup. Her own rested, half full, on the table. "Goodness," she finally said. "Of course I know. They can stay as long as you like." "Where on earth have you been, and why did you go?" She asked the questions quickly, one after the other. Happy to see the boy, she barely knew what she was saying. The boy, too, was glad. He patted the dogs contentedly. It's good, he thought. When you're near her, you forget about being scared. "Ah," he said aloud, "I had to go for a look around. Somebody has to see." As he spoke, a bow crashed onto the roof, then whirled, scraping across the iron. They heard it slither, sliding down the other side. The storm whisked it away to somewhere beyond the house. "That'll be from the garden," the boy added. "Maybe a willow, or off that old quandong tree." The bows were pretty rotten. He sat down when Miss Jones poured tea. His legs felt tired from all the crawling. The dogs sprawled under the table. Wind drowned the sound of their panting. Sitting quietly, Miss Jones drank her tea. When the cup was empty, she refilled it. Every rattle or smash of wind against the walls frightened her, yet she pretended not to notice. "He's frightened too," she thought. "Even under all that dust, you can see he's strained. It must be terrible outside." She heard another limb bump, then scrape along the wall. A sudden hard crack made her jump. Trying to lower her cup steadily, she spilled tea on the cloth. She had to grip to stop both cup and saucer rattling. "Oh dear," she said, "I've spilled my tea." Lifting her apron, she dabbed the cloth. The boy watched her hands. They seemed to be firm and steady. His own felt wet in the palms. He rubbed them down his trousers. "Yeah," he nodded. "You've spilled a drop." "I guess that crack made you jump. It did the same to me." He listened with head to one side. "I don't know what it is. Sounded like a stone or wood splitting. I hope the walls ain't going. I better take a look." He stood up to walk to the door. Miss Jones caught his arm. "No," she said. "Don't go out any more. You couldn't do any good. We'll just have to sit and wait. Perhaps Ted and the other man will be home soon." She took away her hand, and the boy sat down again. Miss Jones sipped some tea before she went on. "They at least must come back. Ross and the others will probably shelter somewhere." "Yeah," the boy agreed, "and some of them deep gullies. I've heard there's a lot of them to the east." He stared at the tablecloth, wishing they were with the men. You felt better with Ross or the boss about. Even old Charlie, good old Charlie. He remembered the way Charlie hopped around the yard. A grin creased his dusty face. Miss Jones saw the grin. "I don't know the joke," she said, "but at least we're better off laughing than crying," and smiled herself. She smoothed her apron, listened again to the wind. The gust shook the walls with its blast. Hunched over his cup, the boy listened too. Miss Jones had opened an inside door leading into the house, and the kitchen felt cooler, but sweat itched running down his chest. It's the dust, he thought, and a feller can't scratch. It makes you niggly in the hands. To relieve them, he fiddled with the cup, turning it round and around. When the second crack came, he stumbled up. Rags rolled over, tangled between his feet. A swirl of smoke belched down the chimney. "Core," he gasped. "There it is again. And it's the chimney. I'll have to see what's happening." Half staggering, he hurried to the door before Miss Jones could stop him. She watched him struggle with the two doors, then turned her head, blinded by the dust that howled in. When she looked again, the doors were shut. The two dogs crouched inside, whimpering. "Well," she told them, "it's no good sitting here." Untying her apron, she hurried through into the house. Her shoes echoed, drumming on the hard-polished floor. She hoped to avoid seeing either of the aboriginal maids. They had probably gone to their own distant quarters. In the boss's bedroom, she ripped off her dress. Rummaging in a wardrobe, she found shirts and trousers and pulled them on. Not waiting to look in a mirror, she hurried back to the kitchen. "They'll do," she thought, "for all that I'll be needing. I'd get blown away in a dress." The full wind force frightened her when she struggled to open the doors. She wavered for a moment, then remembered the boy. Her arms ached, straining with the doors, but she closed them. With her foot, she managed to keep the dogs inside. Edging along the wall, she reached the jutting brickwork built out around the stove. Its end tapered above to a chimney. She saw the boy pressed flat against the wall, peering up to the roof. When she touched him, he turned his head. His dust-raw eyes could barely see, but he guessed who it was. "Ah," he shouted, "you shouldn't have come. It's too rough here for anything." Then he leaned toward her to add, "It's the chimney all right. There's a forked branch hooked round it. I'll have to climb up to free it." As he shouted, he tried to push away from the wall. Wind forced him back, his face almost smashed on the brickwork. Miss Jones gasped. She felt her own body being pushed against the wall. The wind blew directly onto them. "You can't," she screamed. "It would be impossible. Leave it and come inside." She clutched his arm, trying to pull. Her hand slipped and grated on the bricks. With an effort, she stopped from falling. The boy touched her arm. Leaning over again, he shouted, "I could climb all right. The wind keeps you shoved on the wall. But I ain't got nothing for footin'." To show her what he meant, he scraped a foot up and down. Miss Jones nodded. "I'm mad," she thought, "but everything's mad out here. The wind makes a crazy fury." Her hair whipped in the boy's face when she screamed, "I'll help. You can climb on my shoulders." Two hands locked, she formed her arms as a stirrup. The boy stared, disbelieving. Through the dust, she seemed smaller than he remembered. "You can't," he shouted. "It ain't right for a woman. You ain't got the strength." Miss Jones began to laugh, slowly at first, then uncontrollably. The wind roar howled in her ears and tore away the laughter. Pressed against the wall, she gasped until she could scream. "Don't be silly. Get on my shoulders and try. It's you who will need the strength." She locked her hands again and waited. Dust blurred even the solid wall. She could barely see it. Unlancing his boots, the boy kicked them off into a nook between the brickwork and the corner. "They'll be right there," he said, "and won't blow away." When his bare foot wedged between her hands, Miss Jones braced her body. She felt him scramble, pushing against the wind, until he knelt on her shoulders. The next moment he was standing, with his bare feet pressing on each side of her neck. She felt their hard soles grate on her skin. Then they lifted as the boy pulled himself up. He sat on the ledge, angled up to the chimney. The forked bow jerked and flapped just above him. Its long broken limbs speared, hooked each side of the chimney. The leaf-stripped ends hissed, pointing with the wind. Reaching upward, the boy gripped carefully. As his hands closed around one side of the fork, he braced a knee on the brickwork. "I'll pull one way," he thought, "till the wind catches it. It ought to tear it out of me grip, and shoot it over the roof. That's if me luck holds out." Balanced precariously, held up by the wind, he hauled on the bow. Down below in the murk, Miss Jones strained to see what he was doing. Suddenly the bow quivered, the boy's knees slipped, and the wind slapped him onto the bricks. Miss Jones screamed when his leg poked out above her, just showing. The bare, waggling foot, but the boy righted himself with another great heave. He hauled the bow, then ducked as the wind snatched it. It hurled away, smashing over the rooftop. The boy sucked for breath before he edged his feet down to feel for Miss Jones' shoulders. Thankfully, she gripped his ankles to steady him. Once on the ground, he groped for his boots after he had stamped them on. His breathing steadied enough for him to shout, "Cor, you did that good. A man couldn't have done it better." Miss Jones choked. She tried to shout or scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she began to grope along the wall to the kitchen. The boy followed. Maybe I did, she thought, but never again. It was terrible while he was up there. Close to the kitchen door, two forms staggered blindly around the corner. The one in front bumped into her before she saw it. It was Ted, humped over against the wind, with his arms shielding his eyes. The swag man trod on his heels. "Oh," she gasped, and almost fell. Ted grabbed her arm. "It's all right," he shouted in her ear. "It's me. I'll help you get the door open." His shirt whipped her face as he grappled with one door, and the swag man wrestled with the other. Miss Jones stumbled between them, followed by the boy. Ted and the swag man staggered in behind, forcing the door shut. Inside the kitchen felt warm and quiet, the stillness stifled after the buffeting outside. Ted stood with the swag man, undecided where to go. Miss Jones was strict about her kitchen and seldom allowed men in. The boy was one exception. He came and went at will. At the moment Ted noticed he had squatted on the floor to quiet Rags and Brolga. They were whimpering around his knees. Todd guessed they were glad to see him after being shut in on their own. "There's a fair old wind blowin'," he said, "enough to frighten anyone." Miss Jones barely heard. Wind blown and dusty. She walked straight across the kitchen to the inside doorway. As she went through, the boy glanced up. "It's them trousers," he thought. "She don't like to be in 'em. I reckon she's gone to change." Turning to Ted, he said, "Yeah, it's blowin' all right. We went out and fixed the chimney. There was a branch stuck round it." Ted stared. The swagman wiped his mouth and sat on the wood box. The look of disbelief cracked his face. "You did what?" Ted spluttered. "Gor stone it, boy. You couldn't have. A man couldn't hang on up there." He listened to the wind squalling over the roof. Every nail in the iron seemed to be strainin'. Legs spread on the wood box. The swagman agreed. "Yeah," he said, "that's the way I see it, and it must be 100-miler." The boy nodded. He gave a final pat to Rags, then stood up. "Yeah, I reckon it is," he told him. "But the funny thing is, it kept me up. Kept me shoved against the stack. It was like someone holdin' you. And I tell you what," he added, "Miss Jones is a good 'un. She bunked me on her shoulders." He remembered the feel of her hands and the grip round his ankles. Ted rubbed his chin for a while, trying to visualize Miss Jones with the boy on her shoulders. He had never seen her other than crisply dressed, wearing starched cap and apron. It just goes to show, he thought, what some of 'em can do. You look at 'em and never know. Tucking in his shirt, he said, "Well, you sure had your hands full, the both of you. Come on, Yabba. We'd better take a look. If the stack's cracked, we'll brace it, put a wire stitch or two round it." At the door, he stopped to look over his shoulder. The boy stood waiting. "Tell Miss Jones," Ted went on, "it won't last much longer. In another hour or so, it'll be all over." He gripped the handle. The swagman stood close to grasp the other. Before the doors opened, the boy asked quickly, "How do you know it'd be good if it was?" Ted jerked a thumb, pointing to the ceiling. The swagman grinned, greasing the dust on his face. "Listen," Ted said. "It's turning gusty now. Lost that high, wild whine and howl." That's the end of a westerly. When it does that, it'll be dead by evening. Ducking his head, he forced out through the doorway, followed by the swagman. The doors slammed when they shut them. For an hour the boy sat listening. He heard sand swirl on the roof and Ted on the stack wire in the chimney. It ain't as fierce now, the boy thought, as it was when I was up there, but it's fierce enough just the same. Toward late afternoon the wind weakened more, pushing up from the table. He walked toward the door. The dogs followed eagerly, padding behind. "We won't wait," he told them. "Miss Jones ain't coming yet. I'll see her later at tea time." Outside the wind snatched and buffeted, but the full force had gone. "It's all right," he added, "but you still can't see. The dust is as thick as ever." Close to his heels, Broga whimpered keenly. Rags bumped against her side. With the boy in the lead, they crept toward the shed. Chapter 8. You Can't Take Her Kanga. After the storm, debris littered the garden. Dust ridged in piles along the hedge and half-covered fences. Trees around the garden leaned, stripped of many branches, but the peppercorns rustled, tall and unbroken. Their tough, stringy boughs drooped leaf-covered. Standing in the early morning light, Ted scratched his head. The swagman squatted near, leaning back against the gate. A cigarette hung from his fingers. Together they stared along the track, watching the boy wheel his barrow toward them. When he drew near, he set down the handles, then wiped his face. Rags and Broga flopped behind him. "Gosh," the boy said, "you wouldn't believe it. Blown all that way, and it ain't even dented." Dusty-handed, he touched the barrow's metal. It had a good, solid feel. He liked its shape, and was glad it wasn't spoiled. Ted eyed the barrow. "Yeah," he nodded. "You were lucky it wasn't busted." He stared around, wondering whether to start by shoveling sand or clearing scattered debris. The job of cementing the chimney could wait for another day. "It's up to me," he thought, "with Ross away, but the thing is, where to start?" Deciding on the debris, he turned to open the gate. "Come on," he told the swagman. "We'll start in the garden, then work out here to the sand." As he went through the gateway, he added, "Give us a hand, son, but do your other jobs first." With the swagman walking beside him, he disappeared beyond the hedge. The boy heard them talking. "Okay," he called. "I'll be with you when I'm finished. You'll see me when I'm ready." Gripping the handles, he trundled the barrow to the wood heap. Rags and Broga trotted each side. Later, balanced on a step-ladder, he helped Miss Jones clean the kitchen. While he wiped the walls, she cleaned the furniture. "I'll do the floor last," he told her, leaning out above the stove. "Then the place'll be clean. You'll be able to do your cooking." Wiping the wall, he covered a big swath, then rinsed the cloth in a bucket. Dust already floated thick in the water. Miss Jones smiled. Freshly clean, she felt bright and cheerful. The dust storm seemed unreal, even as a memory, though the mess remained. Her large white hands moved quickly over a chair when she asked, "Will you have time? Doesn't Ted out there want you?" Through the open doorway, she could see Ted in the garden. He was helping the swagman drag a big broken bow. The boy swayed, shifting the bucket. He set it firmly on the top step. "That's better," he said. "It was sticking in me knees." "About Ted, you don't have to worry. He just sort of asked me like, I'll be there when I'm ready." While he worked, he thought about Rags and Broga. And he wondered where Kanga was. The old man was overdue. His food must be getting short. Yet, I don't know, the boy thought. He don't really bother. He just comes and goes, going on and on. He never seems to stop, not even for eatin'. By dinner time, walls, floor, and furniture were clean. The kitchen smelled fresh and was bright once more. In the afternoon, Ted spat on his hands. "Right," he said. "We'll start on the sand. There's a ton or two to shift. Get your barrow, son, while me and Yaba here do the shoveling." He began to dig, loosening heaped-up sand away from the gateway. The swagman worked near him, shoveling along the hedge. Up in the peppercorns, galahs peered down through the branches or dozed in the heat. Wheeling to and fro, the boy glanced up at them. "It's got me beat," he said, "how you weren't blown away. You must have hung on like anything." Close to Yabba, he set the barrow down and waited as it filled. Yabba shoveled slowly, but pushed the blade deep. Each time he lifted, the shovel overflowed before it thumped down into the barrow. With a final pat, he emptied the last shovelful, then straightened. "You take it easy, son," he told the boy. "There's a fair load there on your barrow." Then he paused to watch Rags, crouching with Rolga. The two were absorbed in the boy. Their eyes followed his slightest movement. Both dogs gleamed silkily in the sunlight, though the black and white of Rags showed more distinctly. Yabba leaned on the shovel when he added, "You've got two good uns there. Would you like to sell the pup? He'd make a crackin' dog for a man knocking about on the track." The boy stared for a moment. He imagined Yabba alone on a vast plain, trudging slowly into the distance. To clear the thought, he shook his head before he said, "No, I couldn't sell him. For one, he ain't mine. I just look after him, both of 'em for that matter, and another I wouldn't if he was mine. I mean, money couldn't buy him." Bending over, he whistled softly. Rags and Brolga crept to nuzzle his hand. He fondled gently, slipping their ears through his fingers. Yabba saw how the boy reacted. "Okay," he told him. "I know how you feel, but I reckon the chance might be there. Good uns are hard to get." And he turned away. Bent over again, he began digging under the hedge. The boy wheeled away the barrow. That night in the shed he thought about Yabba, wondered what it was like to tramp alone on the endless dusty tracks. "It must be good," he thought, "with no one to worry you. Yet I don't know. There must be times when things go wrong. I bet old Yabba knows what it's like to be hungry. Fancy being camped out yesterday alone in the scrub, or in the middle of one of them big plains." The thought made him glad he worked on Yambura. He went to bed in the bunkhouse and dreamed he was carrying a swag, walking side by side with Yabba. For the next few days he worked with Ted and Yabba. Stripped to the waist, he trundled the barrow backward and forward, dumped sand. A great pile grew in the gully beyond the killing pens. When Ted eased his back and said, "That's the last load, son. You can rest your barrow." It was a hot, still evening. Shadows speared long under the peppercorns. Wiping his face, the boy stood between the handles. "Fine," he told Ted. "We've shifted a lot. I got a road cut where I've been wheeling it." Gripping the handles, he wheeled for the last time toward the gully. Rags and Brolga patted each side. Ted tipped back his hat. Yabba leaned on his shovel. "You know," Ted said, "he's a funny kid. You can't quite know what to make of him. Him and them dogs are always together. You never see 'em apart." Yabba rubbed his chin on the shovel handle. "Yeah," he nodded. "That's the way I've noticed. He's a lonely little joker." The two walked together toward the tool room. Ted carried a pickaxe as well as a shovel. On the way, and thinking over what Yabba had said, he added, "I don't know. You couldn't say that with them dogs." At the dump the boy unloaded. On his way back to the wood heap, he glanced to the eastward, where the sky had already darkened. For a moment the distance seemed empty and without movement. Then he noticed a horseman, followed by a stream of dogs. The man was dwarfed against the vastness. "Poor," the boy said excitedly. "It's Kanga. I thought he'd be coming soon." He upended the barrow and left it propped against a log. His hands felt light as he hurried to the horse yards. "I'll get up here," he thought, "on one of these posts, and watch old Kanga come. It'll be a while yet before he gets here." Settled on a post, he sat to watch and wait. Rags sprawled with Rolga in the shadow of the fence. Kanga rode slowly. His saddle held packs strapped in front and behind. The big bay horse traveled freely, though held to a walk because of its load. As Kanga passed, circling the stables, the boy counted Kanga's dog pack. "They're all there," he told Broga, "though some of 'em are limpin'." When the last dog trotted out of sight behind the stalls, the boy slid down. "It's no good waitin'," he said. "Old Kangal'll be a time yet. He's got all them dogs to chain and the horse to unsaddle. We might as well sit in the shed. I could do with a bit of stretch out." With the dogs at his heels, he headed for the shed. At the door he stood for a while before going into the shed. He liked it there with his back to the wall and the dog at his feet. He could see all around the homestead, from the horse yards to the kitchen. A thin plume of smoke trailed up above the chimney. He guessed Miss Jones had just put wood in the fire. When he went inside, the boy stretched out near the feed bin. Hands under head, he looked up at the ceiling. Cobwebs drooped in thin black webs from the cross timbers. Chaff and wisps of hay clung to their lacy fineness. The boy knew every one and watched the way they grew together, linked by fresh shining webs, grayish-brown tracery that caught the setting sun's gleam. The big, bulging spiders on them dozed or raced backward and forward, spinning extra finery. As he lay, the boy felt Rags lick his ear. Broga turned herself around until she sank down quietly. The boy knew she was near, close to his head. "That's it," he told her. "Just make yourself right. It's good layin' there here like this." Through the doorway he watched the sky color and change. Reds, golds, gray, and purple. The high, wide are always fascinated him. "There's something up there," he thought, "you don't know nothing about. You can't say what it is, but it's there. You feel as if someone's watchin'." He was always asleep when Kanga stood in the doorway. A long, thin chain dangled in his hand. "Cor," the boy said, "it's you, Kanga." He went to scramble up, but saw the chain. A sudden ache washed over him. You ain't," he tried to continue but choked. The words stuck, clogging in his throat. A sudden ache washed over him. You ain't," he tried to continue but choked. The words stuck, clogged in his throat. Kanga looped the chain. A leather collar was clipped to the end of it. "Yeah," he nodded. "I'll take her tonight. She can spend the night with the others, ready to pull out in the morning." He called Broga softly and unbuckled the collar. Obedient to his voice, the bitch hunched up to creep toward him. Her eyes flickered from him to the boy, then back again. She whimpered, though her jaws were tightly shut. Suddenly the boy broke. "No, no, no," he mumbled. "You can't take her, Kanga. She's happy here with me and Rags." With an effort, he caught the bitch's round shoulders and tried to hold her. Her silky coat slid through his fingers. Kanga buckled the collar after passing it around her neck. Broga crouched, droop-eared by his legs. "The pup don't need her," he said. "He's finished sucking milk. He'll do better now if he's on his own." With the chain hanging slackly, he turned to the doorway. Broga swung around behind, ready to follow. Disbelieving, the boy stayed on his knees. "Can't you leave her?" he begged. "Just for a while. Another month ain't much. I can sort of talk to her and get her used to it then." He stared at Broga, seeing her warm, sleek body, the sad droop of her slim, pointed head. "It ain't true," ran through his mind. "I'm asleep and dreamin'. Though I knew it had to come, it's true all right." He groped sideways, feeling for Rags, and pulled the pup to him. Rags licked his hand and tried to struggle free. He wanted to follow his mother. Kanga paused in the doorway. Glow from the raw red sunset flared harshly, and he stood outlined. The broad-brimmed, dusty hat shadowed his face. "Dogs is dogs, son," he said. "Whichever way you take 'em, they has to work for their livin', same as everything else." As he gathered the chain up short in his hand, he added, "The others are footsore from workin' hard. It ain't right for her to keep on restin'. The pup's got his turn to come." Broga marched, stiff-legged, behind him when he went out through the doorway. Her tail swished once going around the corner. Bent over on the floor, the boy felt sick. "What can you do?" he whispered to Rags, holding him tightly. "She ain't my dog, as far as ownin', and that's all that matters." Rags struggled again and almost slipped free. But the boy held on. Then suddenly the pup lay still. Its head rested over the boy's arm. "Yeah," the boy said, "I know how you feel. She's your mom, and it hurts. But you got to remember," he added, "you're almost as big as she is." Rags snuffled, and the boy set him down. The two sat staring toward the doorway. When Kanga came by, after chaining Broga, the two were still sitting, Rags on his haunches, the boy with his back to the feed bin. Kanga saw them, hunched in the shadowy half-light. "It's tea time," he said. "I heard the bell ring." Tall in his wide-shouldered way, he walked on toward the wood heap. The boy stared after him. For minutes Kanga seemed to be walking the short distance, then he disappeared behind the woodpile. The boy heard the rustle of wood chips. "Stay there," he told Rags, and pushed him under the feed bin. "You can bet I won't be long." As he went out through the doorway, he closed the door, then fastened it securely. He listened for a moment, but Rags was still. Not a movement rustled the straw. Thinking of Broga, the boy walked after Kanga. He saw the old man go round to the mess room. In the kitchen, Miss Jones lit a lamp. Ted had started the electric generator, but she preferred lamplight. It gave a softer, gentler glow. She looked up when the boy came in. Her smile changed to concern as she said, "Hello, whatever's the matter? You look really sad about something." The boy slumped down on a chair. "I don't know," he told her. "It's just the way things go. You get sick of 'em sometimes." Miss Jones nodded. She pretended to be busy fussing over the sideboard. 2 plates lay heaped with meat, and she picked up a fork. It glittered when she turned. "Yes," she said, "I'm sure we all do. Would you like beef or mutton?" She held a plate ready. The boy remembered many things: meat for Broga, meat for the pup, chops in his pocket, and the lean, moist nose of Broga nuzzling in his palm. He felt full in the throat as he said, "Mutton, thanks, Miss Jones. I'd like some scraps afterwards for Rags. Kanga came and took Broga tonight." The words rushed out before he could stop them. Miss Jones heard the choke in his voice. She forked the meat. Thin, round slices covered the plate. When she set it in front of the boy, "I'm sorry," she murmured, "but you know how Kanga is." Thought of Kanga's gaunt, seamed face came to her as she spoke. She could see its carved, grim features. His whole demeanor kept men away, and he lived alone from choice. Not even the boss tried to order him. The boy hunched over and began to eat. The food made him think again of Broga. She'd be hungry by this time tomorrow. "Yeah," he told Miss Jones, "he's hard all right. He never feeds 'em when they're home and tied behind stables. He waits next day until they've hunted." He chewed and swallowed a mouthful of bread before he added, "And he reckons it spoils 'em if you feed 'em regular. The trouble is, Miss Jones, he don't barely eat himself." A kettle spat steam suddenly, and Miss Jones hurried to move it. Standing near the stove, she heard a wild dog sobbing cry, somewhere out near the sandhills. The cry sounded faint and far away, almost whispering in the quietness. Yet the sound made her shudder. "Ah," she exclaimed, "what a dreadful cry! Whatever was it?" Both doors were open to let in cool evening air, and the sound had filtered in. She closed the outer one. "That's better," she went on. "I feel safer with the door shut. It's no wonder Kanga is strange. Always living alone in the open. Sounds like that would frighten anyone." The boy barely heard either Miss Jones or the wild dog's howl. Absorbed with his thoughts, he just finished eating. The last slice of meat he slipped in his pocket, along with some bread crusts. "It'll help," he thought, "with whatever Miss Jones gives." He drank a final gulp of tea before he asked, "What was that you said, Miss Jones? I reckon I wasn't listening." Miss Jones smiled. "No," she said. "I don't reckon you were. I heard a dreadful howl and wondered what it was. Then I said something about Kanga. It's no wonder he's like he is. But it doesn't matter. Have you had enough tea?" She glanced at the plates, now empty on the table. The boy nodded. He felt sorry that he hadn't been listening. But he wanted to see Rags and soothe him. Alone for the first time, a pup misses its mother. "Yeah," the boy said again. "Yeah, thanks a lot, Miss Jones. I'd better be getting along. And I'll take those scraps if they're handy." He walked stiffly around the table with one hand over his hip pocket. The crust bulged uncomfortably. Miss Jones tipped scraps into a saucepan lid, and then added 2 slices of meat. "There," she said with a smile, "there's an extra good treat for him. Bring the lid back in the morning. It's an old one that doesn't matter." As he went out, the boy glanced back. Miss Jones was wiping dishes. He balanced the lid in one hand and held the door with the other when he said, "I don't know, Miss Jones, but you're pretty good. I'd like to say thanks again," and he let the door close behind him. Miss Jones heard him trudge along the pathway and open the gate. She sighed as it creaked, then slammed. Outside the shed, the boy stood undecided. He thought Broga had whimpered somewhere beyond the stables, but he wasn't sure. He knew where Kanga changed his dog pack, and he knew about Skipper. Old Kanga left him loose, crouched near his gear and saddle. Skipper was trained to fight and guard. Anyone going close to either the gear or the chained dogs would have the king dog to contend with. The boy remembered that Ross had once warned him, "When Kanga's home, don't ever go beyond the stables. That dog of his'll kill you." "And I mean it, son. That's the savagest dog ever bred. Or maybe I should say trained. Old Kanga trained 'em like that." And Ross had walked away, shaking his head. "I ain't scared," the boy thought, "but it wouldn't be right. They're Kanga's dogs, and he doesn't want anyone near 'em. That's the part that hurts with Broga. But if she's really crying, I'm going Skipper or no Skipper." Though he listened for minutes, Broga neither whined nor whimpered. Chained to a peg, she lay in amongst the dog pack. The years of training dulled all ache and longing. Her life with the boy seemed far, far away. When he opened the door, the boy crept in quietly. Almost on hands and knees, he felt the ground ahead. "Hi there, little feller," he whispered. "I don't want to tread on you. You ain't like your mom for hearing me." As he groped, his finger touched, then slid over Rag's keen pricked ears. "So you was listening," the boy added. "The trouble is, I keep forgetting. You're maybe more a half-grown. You can't say that's really little." Squatted back against the bin, he fed Rags from the saucepan lid. The meat and crust he pulled from his pocket to add to the scraps. "I was going to leave 'em," he told Rags, "and let you find 'em, but I can't. We just ain't right for playin'. You get a feelin' that stops you, and it takes a time to pass." After Rags had eaten, they stretched out together on the hay. The boy stared up at the ceiling. "It's dark," he thought, "yet you know what's there. The cobwebs are hanging down, and in a way that's how it was with Broga. I knew she had to go, though I kept on being in the dark. I didn't want to see." He let his hand rest gently on the pup and felt its warm, soft coat. "The trouble is," he mumbled, "you're growing too fast. Old Kanga'll take you next." The last thoughts he had were of Broga. He wondered if she missed him, or the shed and its dry, rustling straw. Something he loved had gone out of his life.